All right, well, it is 11 o'clock Mountain Time, a little earlier or a little later, depending on where you're joining us from. So why don't we go ahead and get started? And as I always say, we're doing a little logistics at the beginning here. So if a few people join late, no problem. So welcome everyone for our conversation today about Inscribe and how you can use a community-based support model to really help and engage students across the entire student journey. My name is Katie Kapler. I'll introduce myself a little bit more in a second, but a couple of logistics, as I said. So number one, we are recording this webinar, so we will send out a copy to everybody afterward. And if you have other colleagues that are interested, of course, feel free to share that recording. I'm also joined today by Danielle Bonner from our team, who is going to help monitor the chat, keep an eye on questions that come in, make sure that I don't skip anything important. Speaking of which, if you do have questions, feel free to put those into the chat or into the Q&A area. We generally prefer the chat because then your fellow colleagues can see the questions that you're asking, and we'll do some of the answering directly in that chat space, but we'll also take most of, if not all of the questions live as we work through the conversation. So as I said, I could have gone to the screen for the introduction. So as I said, Danielle, who is joining me today from our team, and then myself. So I am one of the co-founders and at Inscribe and also our CEO. For those of you who maybe are not as familiar with Inscribe, we are a virtual support platform, and we help institutions build communities to connect students with faculty, staff, and peers across their institution, so that they can access answers and resources and build relationships with the individuals that are going to help them succeed in their learning journey. If you don't mind taking a minute as we get started here to also just introduce yourself. I can see some people are already doing that in the chat, which is great, but would just love to know who you are, what your role is at your organization, where you're from. And I always like to ask if there's something that really brought you to the webinar today that you really want to learn, want to make sure that we touch on, please let us know, because I know everybody comes from sort of a slightly different perspective. And while we'll provide some generalized content and answers today, we're also happy to dig in directly to personal. Sorry, one of my friends just posted he's going to harass me during the webinar, so we look forward to that. Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, we've got a feisty group here in the chat. We have people that are going to harass you during the webinar. We also have
I love it. Bring on the heckling. I can handle it.
People that are just happy that the white bar is gone. So it's going to be a fun time.
We aim to please. It's one of those days. It's not Friday yet, but it feels like it. I've completely lost my train of thought. Let us know who you are. We'd love to know what brought you here today, and hope that we can accommodate your interest during the conversation. So kind of just a level set, like what is it about today's landscape that makes the concept of student support and rethinking our approach to student support so important? And what we believe at Inscribe is that there really is no longer a traditional student in today's landscape, because even for those students who are in person, although many of our students now are learning online, they have the characteristics of what has generally been considered non-traditional. So some examples here. I've got kids at home. I'm working a part-time or even a full-time job while I'm studying. Lots of us learning online. In fact, I'm sure this statistic after COVID is outdated. The number of students who are taking full or partial programs virtually, and then the large number of students who are really the first in their family to attend post-secondary. And the characteristics that these students have in common really are about lacking a lot of time and flexibility in their day, needing an educational experience that kind of meets them where they are, and not having necessarily the experience to navigate what can be a very complicated landscape in higher ed. So also looking for support systems and institutions that can create avenues to connect that are easy to use and sort of understand that some of these students might be coming in feeling a little intimidated or uncertain about how to even reach out or who to reach out to. So we think about that landscape, and then we think about what does this really mean from the institution's perspective? Well, when you have this complicated landscape of students, providing support for them is really difficult. Number one, you've got a lot of students, so you're receiving emails and you're sorting through them. Many of them are really the same question that you're answering over and over again. Students are asking questions at all times of day. So a lot of these learners are really active on the night or the weekend, which is the opposite hours of perhaps when your staff or faculty are actually working. And the imbalance between those students who are reaching out and asking for help and those who, either because they don't know how or they're sort of nervous or embarrassed, never actually reach out at all. So how do you build a support system that can accommodate and really speak to these non-traditional students, but do it in a way that makes the institution successful and not creating an additional burden for you? And so that's really what Inscribe is about. So our virtual communities have demonstrated the ability to not only improve outcomes and increase engagement for that set of learners, but do it in a way that is effectively reducing the cost of support at the institution. And whether you measure that in dollars or in time spent on more basic tasks, being able to hand that time back to those individuals and teams. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how it works, and then we're going to jump in and look at Inscribe Live, and so you can kind of see the platform in action. So our communities, first of all, and this is a lot about what we want to talk today, are really designed to work across the entire student life cycle. So you might have communities that focus in that enrollment piece. So even before the student steps on campus, creating spaces for those applicants to ask questions and connect with existing students and alumni. We have communities that are really designed to support students in their moments of learning. Not reflected here, but we'll look at an example, would be things around student success. So connecting with the registrar, financial aid, advisement, and then of course, academic and classroom communities that are facilitating the students' learning and helping them achieve mastery in their content. And then starting to even think about, as I plan to exit the university, am I really prepared for the job search? Am I connecting with potential employers? The advantage of this model is that, and we'll see in a second, each of these community spaces can really have its own personality and design. So the enrollment team can shape and craft their community in some ways very differently than how the classroom community might be shaped and crafted to meet their specific needs. But from a student's perspective, I have one place to go to connect with all of these individuals. So I don't actually have to think about all of that. I have like a unified experience to turn to, and that's part of that simplification process for the students. We don't want to make it hard for you to figure it out. Just go here and ask your question, and somebody will be there to help you. Really what we're doing under the covers is connecting these collaborative groups together in these communities. So of course, students want to connect with the experts on your campus, whether that's a faculty member, a staff member, an advisor, but there's also real power in connecting with peers and getting the student voice and student input when individuals are struggling. That's important for students, but that's also great for you too, because that amplifies your scalability. If students are helping each other, it means you're not always relying on the expert on campus to jump in. These communities are also about establishing some of the non-cognitive or the sort of 21st century skills and experiences that we know students need to be successful in their journey. So there's the practical side of like, I'm stuck, I have a question, I need help. And then there's this side of, I just want to see that there are other students out there who are like me, who have similar background and interest, who are struggling with the same things that I'm struggling with. Like, we cannot say enough about how meaningful it is for a student who feels like I'm the only person that doesn't get this, to see that there are 15 or 20 or 100 other students that have had that same question as them. So finding these groups and being able to foster that sense of belonging. And then I would be remiss if I don't talk about sort of, as we're solving this problem, one of the assets of the tool is that it deeply integrates into the systems that you're already using on campus. So depending on the type of community you have, maybe that's integrating into your website or your portal, your learning management system, your courseware. You can create access points to Inscribe from all of those locations. And we'll look at that as part of the demo as well. But ultimately what we're trying to do is help institutions upgrade their approach to student support. So one space for all the information, making that space accessible anytime, anywhere. So we're meeting the needs of those students who don't have time in their day. Probably really importantly, that when content is generated in your Inscribe community, it's immediately available to everybody. So you cut down on the number of repeat questions you're getting because the question's asked and answered, and now all students can see it. And in doing so, by amplifying this asynchronous mode of support, you're pushing a lot of the support needs to a more inexpensive, what some people call level 1 line of defense, which is great for you because it means that you can save your time for those one-on-one interventions when they're really needed. But it's also great for students because it means they're probably getting an answer to a question much faster than if they had to send an email and wait for a response. And of course, there's that social component. So those students who are a bit nervous, anxious, shy, we find that they are more likely to reach out in a community when they have more control over how they're asking their questions, when they're asking their questions. And they can see what other people are asking. So maybe they don't even ever raise their hand, but they benefit from the questions that others, and they're building that sort of peer and support network along the way. So these are all the goals that we have. I won't read through these, but I will say this type of interaction, this type of support model is just native to the student's experience. So when we implement Inscribe communities, you do not even have to explain to your students how to use it or what the purpose is. They always jump right in and know and really appreciate the benefit that comes from it. And of course, we look at, well, what is the ultimate impact of these spaces? So I'll talk about just a few statistics quickly. Of course, as we move across the learning journey, we think about slightly different statistics and impact metrics. At the very beginning, when we're thinking about things like enrollment and onboarding, what we've seen is some of the stuff here. So if you're active in a community as a pre-admit student, you're more than twice as likely to matriculate into the institution. So really understanding which students are coming on board and increasing that yield. For students that have that experience, their satisfaction level with the university, if those of you who use Net Promoter Score, but really it's a measurement of satisfaction. So their satisfaction is much higher than those who don't have access to this collaborative space. As we move further into the journey, we see impacts on outcomes. So an 8, sometimes 10% increase in successful completion of courses, and ultimately a positive impact on the time spent. So reporting a 23% decrease in the number of support requests teams are getting from other avenues, so phone calls and emails and things like that. So you can really improve the student outcomes while also saving time at the organization. So I'll pause there. That was a lot of content before even seeing the product. So any questions just based on that introduction? And I'm going to jump right in and we can take a look at what this really looks like in practice.
We do have a couple of questions in the chat. Yeah. You sort of touched on this when you talked about the different integration points that Inscribe integrates into. But can you maybe elaborate on some of the other best practices to drive traffic to the Inscribe platform?
Yeah, for sure. So we talk about the 4 Ps in terms of driving engagement and building a successful community. One is just having a clear purpose. So making sure that whatever your community does is something that students care about and will benefit from. But really, if you're implementing at any of those stages of the journey, you've already accomplished that mission. Then the access point. So having that integration into the workflow that the student is already using, and frankly, that your moderators are already using is important too. We don't want to create a separate destination that people have to go to. Let's really just be in the workflow of where they're likely to be when they get stuck or need help. Certainly people, so you want to have the students in there, you want to empower them to ask questions and help each other. And then you want to have a small amount of moderation. It is not a large lift. And it's not a lot of people. Often our moderator teams are 1 or 2 people, even for hundreds or thousands of students. But it's really those experts that when those questions come in that need an expert answer, that somebody's there to catch that and respond to it. And then the last one is just promotion. So letting people know the community is there, incorporating it into your narrative at the institution and really embracing it. So if you can accomplish those 4 components, what we find is that your community will take off and thrive.
Wonderful. We'll share those 4 Ps in the follow-up after this webinar as well. The next question is in regards to implementation. So many administrators are very, very, very busy this time of year. Can you tell us what it takes to implement the Inscribe product within the student lifecycle?
Yeah, so implementation is actually very simple because our community is not forcing people through us to get to other systems that we integrate into the places that you already have. We can turn a community implementation around in a week or less. And we also, all the integration points are very standards based. So there's nothing custom that you need to do. We just link into where you already are, very quick and simple using tools like LTI, which most institutions are supporting. And then you're off and running. And you can really rely on the students themselves to drive a lot of the conversation and participation. So I think sometimes people think there's a lot of setup I need to do, a lot of pre-work, I got to load a lot of content. That's not true at all. We have templates for you based on where you are that we can provide. We know what topics are most likely to resonate with the students. We can upload a little bit of content if you have it, but then just turn it over to your students and they'll drive.
Beautiful. All right. So that's all the questions that we have in the chat at this point in time. But I would encourage our attendees, if you have any questions, as Katie goes along through the demo and as we look into the product, please go ahead and put them in the chat and I'll just chime in and interrupt, Katie, as long as you're okay with that.
Thank you. Please do. I love that. So let's jump over to look at Inscribe. So I'm going to, after all this talk about integration and making sure you're integrated into the workflows, I'm actually going to go ahead and demo standalone. I will show you an integration example in a little bit, but just to kind of orient ourselves to the platform, I'm going to start as a standalone experience. The other thing to note, so this would be an example of a student who has come into Inscribe and an example where my institution has chosen to roll out communities across that full life cycle. So before I got here, I was part of an applicant community that I continue to have access to because my institution wants existing students to talk to prospective students. I have a place where I can meet with my coaches and the student success team to get answers. And then I have my first year courses here, and I've got communities for each of those courses that are taking place. Know that it is absolutely possible, depending on your institution, to start at one point in the journey. It is not necessary to roll Inscribe out across every aspect of the journey all at once to make it successful. So oftentimes when we talk to an institution, they're feeling this pain point of communication and peer engagement at one place really acutely. And we'll tend to start there as the starting place, and then we can expand out from there as other opportunities present themselves. But for today, we'll see an example where we're rolled out across all things. And you'll start to get a sense of how the different communities kind of take on their own personality and shape, but within a very similar framework. So again, nice for the student that when I go into my applicant community or my student success community, I feel some consistency of that experience. So it's familiar to me, I know how to engage, and I feel confident that my questions are going to get answered there. I sort of trust the experience. So here's an example if I was working on the applicant side of what something might look like. And I'll use this to just stop for a second and touch on a few features. So as you saw, we were in the Crafted University institution, and I had multiple communities, including an applicant community. And so I'll point out a few things here. Within this community, it's likely to be supported by, from a moderator standpoint, enrollment coaches are often the folks that support the applicant community, individuals like that, but also could incorporate existing students, alumni, anybody that you feel would help prospective students get a sense of what is it like to be at this institution and get excited about being part of that. And you'll see that that's reflected also in the topics that we tend to recommend for these communities. So things like the student experience, alumni voices, there I'm really getting to know the personality of the institution and the honest, authentic answers about what it's like to really be a part of that. But then we have that practical side. So always questions about transcripts, financial aid happen in this population of learners. Those topics are totally customizable. So if you have a different perspective on what you think your applicants might be interested in, all of that can also be changed. We also see in this experience the concept of channels, so subgroups that can exist within your community. So a general space that everybody can talk, but I, happen to be a parenting student. And so I would love to connect with other prospective or existing students who are parenting and have conversations about what's it really like to manage that. You may be an institution that has a big population of military students, so we sometimes see groups form around that. So you can see I have the ability to join those groups. So it's kind of self-identifying my affinity groups and who I want to be part of. How you use these channels also is totally customizable, and we'll see some other examples in different communities of how that works. So I'm going to stop here, see if we have any questions about just the organizational structure of the community. And then I'll jump into a different example so we can see that. We'll talk about a different set of features.
I haven't seen any questions come in, but you did mention setting up custom channels. Does Inscribe recommend a certain set of channels that most institutions are likely using?
Yeah, depending on what your flavor of community, we can give you some examples of what we have seen work for other institutions or how to think about it. So for example, here in applicant communities, we find that affinity groups tend to be the thing that students gravitate the most. Now, depending on the demographics of your students, those affinity groups might look slightly different, but we can talk with you about what some of those examples are. If I jump to a different community, so let's, for example, jump into this student success community. Now we still see some affinity groups, but also now we're touching a little bit on organizations and groups within the universe that exist within the university themselves, or cohorts that I might be joining with that I'll have some connection to. So you can see how the groups that we recommend might be slightly different depending on the use case.
Wonderful. So you mentioned a little bit about, you said transcripts, and I think you might have said FAFSA in there. And so tell us about security and how this complies with FERPA.
Yeah, so lots of options for, or lots of considerations for how FERPA works in the platform. So number one, students have a lot of agency over how they are presented to the other members of the community. So I'm going to click here and go to my profile. You can, as an institution, set the default view for student names. So the default could be first name, last name, last initial, or just initials. So you kind of take the first step at deciding what that level of visibility is going to be. And then each student, even after that, can go in and modify their display name, add a short bio, add some other information about themselves. And when they post in the community, that's what will be presented to other folks. So they can control that visibility in that way. We do also collect email address, but you can see here I'm logged in as a student. We never show the email address of any user to other students. Only moderators or administrators in the community can see that information. The other way that we support FERPA, so this is a good segue, is that as a student goes to post a new question or contribute to the community, they have another level of control over how they're presented. So when they go to post, they can choose whether they're posting broadly to everybody, whether they want that post to be anonymous, meaning other students in the community can't see who posted this. I am not anonymous to the moderator. So it's not full anonymity, but it is controlling my visibility to my peers. Or I can post privately. So I'm only going to post something directly to the moderators. So the student has that ability. And then if the student posts and the moderator makes a decision that like, hey, this post isn't really appropriate for the entire community or relevant to the entire community, if the students post it broadly, you as a moderator can actually move that post into a private status and hide it from the rest of the community. So lots of things that we do to help support that. We obviously take that very seriously. Student privacy and student agency over their data is something that we think is very important. And so we weave it into lots of different places in the platform.
Good. Okay. One question did come in while you were responding to that one. How many communities does a university usually have?
Anywhere from 1 to, I don't know what our top 300, but of course, students don't belong to every community. So especially once we move into the academic space, we tend to get a lot of communities around different course topics and things like that. From a student's perspective, the average student will belong to, somewhere between 4 or 5 communities that are active at a given time.
Perfect. That's all the questions we have in the chat for now.
So there's no real limit to the number of communities, like there's no programmatic limit to the number of communities an institution can set up and have. It's really just about what makes sense to align with, where you want those groups to be forming. So while we're in here, I just started to talk about some of the feature sets. So a couple of things that you see here. So this is our the onboarding experience. So when a student jumps in to a new community, they will automatically be given this onboarding, which is configurable by you. So you can go in, you can add a little welcome content and a welcome video that the student can walk through. They'll then be encouraged to follow particular topics and things that are interesting to them, and then they'll be encouraged to go update their profile. So if I click this, it's going to launch me over to that profile tab we were just looking at. And there's some different config, and to introduce themselves to other members of the community. So there's a lot of configurability here, and you can make changes to how that workflow works. But it's a nice way to just bring students in and help them kind of understand the norms of the community, start to get active and start to participate. And then we talked a little bit about the organizational structure of the community. Really the heart of the platform is the Q&A area. So that's where the conversations area, that's where students are posting questions, sharing information. It's very dynamic, very student driven. But of course, we are also really pushing for reusability of content in Scribe. So when a student comes to us and has a specific question, the first thing they're likely to do is search for their question, because they want to get to an answer as quickly as possible as well. So if they start to search, we're going to go through all of the content and resources in the platform and try and direct the student to a solution as quickly as possible. So if that were my question, I could see that Carolyn asked it. I could give her, a thumbs up to say, great question, perhaps find the answer I need and move on. Now, not every student will necessarily search, or maybe I tried to search and I didn't, or I sort of skipped that process. So I go straight into the asking a question flow. Well, we are still going to try and direct you back to the content that we think is going to be helpful to you. So this is Rosie. Rosie's the technology assistant that lives in your community and really helps facilitate some of the behind the scenes, kind of keeping the community healthy and scalable. So I've started to type my question, and Rosie's like, well, I kind of think your question's been asked and answered, so let me suggest some solutions here, what I think might help you. And the student can preview that content and again, hopefully find what they need and move on. So while we'd love for every student to engage and participate, remember that engagement isn't only about posting questions and posting to the community. It's about consuming and reusing the content that you've already provided. So we want to make sure that we're facilitating that as well. But not every question will be answered right away. So let's say I have a new question, and sometimes we will just sort of automatically tag the question for the student, depending on where they are in the platform. But then the student can also tag it themselves, choose again how they want that post to be posted, and share it. And you can see here, we also have the ability to bring in images and videos and make the post very multimedia rich, or just use text-based, and it kind of depends on the community how those things get used. And then they'll post it. Now that a new question has been posted, the members of the community will be alerted. Today, those notifications go out via email, and you can interact directly from that email to endorse, engage, or respond to the post that's come through. And we are in the process of also building a mobile app. So I will say the platform today is mobile responsive. So it works on any device, no problem, as a web-based app. But we are also building a native app that will come out later this fall And then we'll have additional things like push notifications and stuff that can be in the student's pocket. But it's just a great way for, you don't have to be like hovering over your community every second to know what's happening and what's going on. The community will reach out to you to let you know that there's somebody that needs help or something taking place. Feel free to interrupt me, Danielle, as I go about questions that come in.
There is one thing that came in, and you've kind of jumped back and forth through a couple of different use cases. I know you showed the student support at the beginning. We're in a student success and coaching community right at the moment, but tell us about the different use cases that you would recommend for an institution.
Yeah, I really see four major use cases, four primary use cases around students that are the most common and tend to be the most impactful. So creating communities for pre-admit students who are going through the enrollment process. Really, we know that enrollment can be very confusing for students, and things like transcripts will trip them up. But we also know that students really are curious about what it's really like to be a student at your campus. And if you can start to build those relationships for students and that excitement with existing students and alumni before they set foot at the school, they're more likely to matriculate, and they're more likely to already have established some connections the day they walk in the door. So they're kind of ready to go, and they already feel confident about their ability to be there, ability to succeed. This student success community is also very common. Pushing out information related to things like, again, financial aid, registration, strong start, all the non-academic stuff that a student really needs to be successful. And that's such a complicated network of information that institutions have found it useful to centralize that in one place for students, so they have one place to go, and the team supporting them can be more scalable in their delivery of that information. Academic communities are very common, and we'll take a look at an example of that, but really building learning communities around the coursework that students are doing, really emphasizing peer-to-peer engagement in those spaces. So students are helping each other, they're learning by helping each other, and that way faculty can spend less time answering every single question in email and more time like helping and tutoring the students that need it. And then we have seen a growth in interest in that career space. So better connections with the Career Center, possibly having your communities again bring alumni, and even if there are people that often hire your students, having individuals from those companies be participating in those communities. So you're not just teaching the student how to build a resume and create their LinkedIn profile, but they're actually connecting in real time with people who could potentially hire them or give them advice about how to get hired at particular companies. So those are, I would say, are the four common use cases that we see for students.
Thank you.
Great. So I'll just touch on this quickly. Obviously, once a question has been posted, people can answer it. There's no limit to the number of answers that come in. So sometimes, when it's asked and answered, sometimes it takes, or sometimes there's multiple answers, right, depending on people's perspective. And you can also provide feedback on the answers in terms of like, great response, great, thanks for your help. And I felt I answered that one too. And the person that asked the question will also get alerted. So as soon as their question has been answered, they'll get a notification saying that the question's been answered. Here's the response that you get, and you can link back in to get more information. I'm now going to actually log out as a student and log back in as a moderator, so I can show you a few additional capabilities as we look through to the next use case. So let's do it this way. Oops. Okay. I normally would do this in two browsers, but today I decided we're just going to go one browser. You can see all my myriad Google logins. Okay, so now I've logged out and logged back in as a moderator. Same community. I think if I refresh this one, it'll bring me in as Katie. There we go. So now we're looking at a slightly different use case. So we looked at the applicant concept of a community, pre-admit students, topics around like, what's it really like to be there? How do I manage this process? The student success community, where I don't think we talked about this, but topics around, again, financial aid, registration, connecting with my coach or my advisor. And then here's an example of an academic community. So still some social component, but now really our topics are aligning with the content that I'm learning week to week. So exact same layout, exact same platform, just designed slightly differently to match the use case for that particular set of learning that we're supporting. Now that I'm in as a moderator, I'll show you a couple of additional features. So we looked at that Q&A component. One thing that moderators have the ability to do is they can edit or delete any post in the platform. So I can edit and delete my own posts, but as a moderator, I can also edit and delete somebody else's post. I can also archive content that might no longer be relevant, and I can feature content. So if there's a great post or a great answer that I want to make sure is pinned to the top of the view, I can do that featuring and pin it there. I also have the ability to endorse. So you can see that as a moderator, I carry this little badge with me. So that's a visual cue for the participants in the community of where the experts, so to speak, have chimed in. So these are the answers that are most likely to be the certified answer. But when a student provides a great answer, we don't want the expert to then have to type that answer again. So the expert, the moderator in the community can then endorse the post from that student. So the student doesn't have the badge, but I've now added that visual cue, that badge to the post. This student gets credit in this system. We'll talk about that in a minute, that reputation system, for providing an awesome answer. And I, as a moderator, do not have to type it again. So it's an efficiency thing, and it's also a way to encourage and give credit to peer-to-peer support when it's really working well. In this college algebra community, it's also reflecting one opportunity you have for building community in the academic sense. So sometimes communities in learning are really designed to match directly to an individual course section. So I, Katie Kapler, am teaching college algebra, and I have an inscribed community just for my students. But I may also be teaching multiple sections of college algebra, depending on how big my classes are. And I can actually stitch together those sections. So although they're probably separate in my LMS instance, they're sharing a community within Inscribe. So I'm further scaling my time as a faculty member by bringing all those students together. And now they have a general space where all my students can be together. And then I can create, using channels, set a space for each of my sections if I want to be able to have individual conversations with just that set of students. So any questions about that? And again, we can see here how the content is now more about academics and learning and aligned to that kind of roadmap of learning that's going to take place in the LMS.
So I see over here on the right-hand side, meet the moderators. Who would be a perfect candidate for a moderator within communities?
Yeah, so in a learning community like this, absolutely we want the faculty, it's great to have the faculty member in there. A lot of times, especially for larger classes, the teaching assistants are also active members and moderators of the community. In fact, in really large classes, it's usually the teaching assistants that are the primary moderators and the faculty members kind of overseeing and watching what's going on, but not necessarily the one on point to answer the questions right away. And sometimes in learning communities, we even see tutors being brought into these spaces. So you can have, if you have folks in your tutoring organization or you work with a tutoring company, having them be active in the learning communities is pretty common as well. Now, of course, depending on what flavor of community you have, the moderators will change slightly so that they're the ones that kind of own that domain at the institution. Were you going to ask something else, Danielle?
No, I'd imagine that in the pre-enrollment use case, that's some sort of enrollment coaches, right? As well as like student success coaches.
Yeah, so for enrollment, it tends to be enrollment coaches. Often student leaders and alumni are active participants and moderators in these communities as well. And then in the student success space, again, as you said, coaches, advisors, student success, leadership, are often the ones that are moderating these spaces. But with the encouragement of peer-to-peer support, the role of the moderator is sometimes about answering the questions. It's sometimes just about, endorsing the answers that other students are providing. But mostly what we're trying to do is get the communication that that individual was primarily doing through individual emails and moving it into this centralized space so that everyone benefits and they're not, again, having that same conversation one-to-one 100 times. They're doing it once and then sharing that across the entire student body.
Such a great point, that how important that peer-to-peer and letting students just own the community is.
Yeah, it's one, obviously one of the benefits of the community experience is what you can learn from your students. So we have a lot of analytics in the platform that will give you insights into, overall what's happening in my community, how are students participating, who is participating, what content are they is resonating with them. So there's a lot of aggregate information that you can learn from. But I would say also just watching how students, what they're talking about in the community and how they're interacting with each other, you can gain incredible insight into things that students are excited about, nervous about, confused about, that you might not have otherwise known, or maybe by the time you figured out that that was happening, it was too late. Like they've already taken the exam, or they've already missed the registration process, so they've already, missed out on getting their transcript in, so now it's no longer possible to matriculate. So it's really about getting in front of those moments that are small challenges that students are facing, but if they're not handled correctly and immediately, they can become like insurmountable challenges to overcome. So we always think what you learn from the students and interactions in this platform is really remarkable. I'll touch on a few more things because I know now that I'm logged in a moderator, I have a few more views. So one question I often get is just like, how do moderators stay on top of this? How much time does it take? Actually, again, because we're shifting the conversations that were previously taking place in email and moving them into a more centralized space, what we find is most moderators actually spend less time on student support after putting Inscribe in place. And we saw that statistic, about a 23% decrease in the number of support requests that a particular institution was getting by centralizing it here. And we also have put some tools in place to just help moderators stay on top of things. So anybody in the platform can see if there are questions that haven't been responded to. Moderators also have the ability to see things that have no moderator response. So if a student has jumped in and answered, but maybe you haven't endorsed it or provided an answer, you can quickly get to that. You can also see things that have been flagged in the platform. The flagging can happen in one of two ways. So in this case, Rosie did the flagging and flagged it for multiple reasons. So we talked about Rosie. She's the technology assistant that lives in the platform. And she is also doing some interesting things to help you stay on top of trends of conversation in the community. So for example, we have a list of keywords. If one of those keywords ever appears in the platform, Rosie will flag it and escalate it. We have a long list. You can customize that list. And it's really about catching, of course, all the bad words are in there, but that because the platform's not anonymous and students know that this is sort of a professional space, I don't think we've ever had an instance of a student post an inappropriate word. But sometimes people put in things there like financial aid or dropout or other trigger words that they just want to know that's coming up in conversation. But the more interesting thing I think that Rosie does is she runs all the conversations through a sentiment API. So she's measuring the emotion of the conversation as it takes place. And you can see here, as she did that analysis, she saw that that particular post was skewing very frustrated and both sort of angry and negative. So she flagged that and escalated it up to somebody. So this is a student who perhaps needs somebody to reach out to them right away, maybe just need someone to pick up the phone and call them. But our goal is to identify those moments and let you know right away so that it's not festering for 24 or 48 hours. You can see immediately and jump in and provide that support. So as a moderator, you can see that information as well. You also have the ability to add resources. We didn't talk a lot about the resources side of the platform, but that is a place where you could put supplemental videos or content that you think might be relevant to students, links to other websites, documents that you might want them to download. Most times people do have kind of a collection of resources sitting around that are in a folder somewhere that they want students to access. So we tend to just preload those. But moreover, as conversations come in and you can see what students are talking about and asking about, you'll sometimes find moments where you're like, oh, I really want to create a more curated answer to this, like a sort of more fully formed answer. And you can do that and then add it into your resource repository and make that available to your students as well. I'm going to jump over and show an integrated view. So let me pause before I leave the platform and see if there's any questions, or Danielle, if there's anything.
Yes, so you've talked about this kind of institution-wide use case. There's a question about implementing into a single program within an institution. Is that a possibility?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So again, it's more common, I would say, that we start with an individual use case or an individual program at a university and then expand from there. So maybe that's the College of Business or the College of Nursing or the undergraduate, space. That is very common and easy to do.
Wonderful. Vincent, great question. Please keep the questions coming into the chat.
I did think of one thing, and I talked about it and then I didn't talk about it. I teased it and then didn't talk about it, is the reputation system. So we saw the profile earlier. Now you can see as a moderator, I can actually see more information about this user, including their email address. But the profile is a great place for students to, personalize how they appear to other people in the platform. And it also is the place where it reflects the reputation that individuals have earned. So we're tracking the contributions of a student to the platform and the impact that their contributions are having on other students. And they can essentially earn badges or reputation as they engage with Inscribe and as they start to build more credibility with themselves and with other members of the community. So what have what conversations have I initiated? How much engagement are we seeing with those conversations? And then am I providing great answers? This is where those endorsements come into play. Am I getting endorsements for the answers that I provide? And then, of course, once again, we really want to emphasize that students who come in and view content, search for content, consume what other people are providing, that is a really important component of engagement in the platform. So we give students credit for that, and we want to make sure that as an institution, you're thinking about that as an important component of your overall community success profile. So this is really exciting, and we have some big plans for the reputation system in the platform. And I know a lot of institutions actually use this to identify potential student leaders for other opportunities, like someone who could be a TA later or join other student leadership and mentorship groups. So you really get a sense of a student's ability to put themselves out there, communicate, help other people, search for knowledge by how they engage with a platform like Inscribe. So really quick, I'm going to jump over and show you an example of an integration. So this is an example of an LMS integration. But again, we do integrations with websites, student portals. We even have courseware integrations, depending on what publisher courseware that you use. Anything that you use on campus, I'm confident that if you said, can we put an integration point there, the answer would be yes. But the LMS is sort of ubiquitous, so it's a nice one to just demonstrate. So this is Canvas. For those of you who are not familiar, don't use that. Same experience with other LMS. We work with all the major platforms. You can add it as sort of a content item in the left-hand navigation. You can add links to Inscribe within individual modules, so as content items here. And you can also add links anywhere there's HTML. So these are all individual links that will take you to your Inscribe platform. When you're integrating into some other system, you have a choice. You can choose to launch out to a new tab. So the experience would be more like launching out here, or you can choose to load this, which is what we call our embedded view. So this, obvious benefits here, keeps me in the context of my learning. I'm not getting distracted by getting out to a new tab. And you can really do all the things that we just looked at right on this page. You can search, ask, respond to other people, browse by topic. So I think this is a really nice view, and it, although it obviously Inscribe is a separate system, you can see how it still looks sort of like a natural extension of the platform the student was already using. When you create these links, you also have the ability to point the student to a specific topic. So here's an example where I'm in week 1 and we're studying quadratic functions. And so when I created that link to Inscribe, I added that filter. So it's automatically just going to show me the content that's relevant to week 1. And that's so huge for a student when they're working through content and they have a question and they're looking for some help, by narrowing the scope for them so they don't have to then search again, and really just putting in front of them what's probably going to be helpful. You see a lot better reusability of content and students getting to solutions faster in that way. It has the added benefit of now when the student goes to post, we can automatically tag it for them. You don't have to think about that. And so that keeps your communities a little bit cleaner over time as well. Any questions about this integrated view or how that works?
I don't see any questions regarding that. I do have a question in regards to how quickly you can get a community set up and what is required from the institution to get it set up.
So we can get communities set up in a couple of days. Really, the only thing required from the institution is if you want to use it in an integrated fashion, that we can get you the integration information and get that set up. This is all LTI based. So either, as a faculty member, if you have the ability to do that integration, if you know who to contact on the LMS side to get that LTI integration set up, super quick and easy. But that's really the only hurdle is if we want to do an integrated approach, do we have the right touch point to do that integration piece, and then we're off and running. And again, we can provide you with a template for your community. You can choose to just run with the template we give you. You can go in and make customizations, but we do have, based on our experience, those templates tend to be pretty full featured and don't require a lot of adjustment to get going.
And what does nurturing the community look like once it's set up?
Really, the main consideration is once you get your community set up, if a student asks a question, make sure that it doesn't go unanswered. That's really the main thing. So let your students know it's there. So I would say, to be fair, nurturing includes letting them know that the community is there and how to use it and why to use it. So really making that announcement and showing your commitment to the space will build trust. But then once a student comes in and starts engaging, you want to make sure that there's timely responses, especially for those early questions. And then you'll see the community kind of builds on itself. But initial days are very much about trust building and making sure students believe that if they post here, there is somebody on the other side to catch that and respond to them.
Thanks. We have about 8 minutes left. So if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat and we'll answer them live.
Awesome. All right, so I think we covered all of the sort of major features. There's obviously a lot of smaller things that we could touch on in here. I'm happy to do a more personalized demo if there's something that you guys are, at your institution, if you're really thinking about and want to go deep on, we're happy to do that. But I just want to reiterate that Inscribe is designed to work across that student life cycle, so we can build these customized experiences, but it's not required to be deployed across that entire life cycle. So deploying against a particular use case within a particular program for a subset of learners on your campus is absolutely doable and quite common. But just knowing that even if you start in one place, you have the ability over time to expand out and tackle additional spaces using the same product. So you're not having to buy 7 different products to cover all of that landscape. I think a lot of institutions just like knowing that they can simplify the stack and the number of things that they're asking their faculty and staff to learn by leveraging similar technology in lots of places. All right. So with that, is there a question?
There is no questions at this time, Katie.
Oh, okay, sorry. Was there anything else you wanted me to, anything else you want attendees to be aware of, Danielle, in terms of upcoming events, or I think we can send some stuff out in the follow-up email. We do have a community self-assessment that we provide to institutions. It's a super quick quiz that you can take. We often encourage, if you're going to take it, send it to a few colleagues so you can all take it and compare notes. But it's designed to essentially ask questions across those different phases of the student life cycle and get a sense of, where are you really thinking about community and scale? And then we'll send you back a report that includes some recommendations on things that you can try at your institution to help improve some of that engagement, depending on how your scores play out. So we'll include that in the follow-up email. I don't know if you have that link on hand, Danielle, I want to drop it in the chat. But otherwise, I would love to hear from you, love to hear your feedback about the event today and what you're thinking, how you're thinking about this space. So there's my email there. Of course, you can also check us out on our website and connect with us in that way. But we really appreciate you taking the time to be here today. And again, we just really hope to continue the conversation with you all in the days to come.
There we go. I just dropped the link